Hey everyone, it's our Shawn McBride. Welcome to another edition of Journey to CEO. Today I'm joined by my regular co-host, Dr. Gatty, Greg Russak, and we're going to be talking about how do we increase our sales. We're particularly looking at this in terms of what's happening here in 2020. Our goal with this Journey to CEO project, which hopefully you're aware of if you're tuning into the show, and if you're not, go subscribe to our YouTube channel, come check out our Facebook group. But our idea is to help people on that journey from going from being an entrepreneur, just getting a business idea, to actually being a full-fledged CEO, if that's the journey they wish to take. So big part of that obviously is pivoting and transitioning. So it's going to be great today to get some sales tips and think some about what's happening with 2020. Let me bring Dr. Ann and Greg up on the screen with me. Hey, everybody.
How are you doing?
Good. Well, I'm glad we're all here. So, we were going to take a look at what's happening in 2020. So Greg, let's just tune into you. Let the audience get to know you a little bit in case they haven't met you yet.
Sure.
Give us a little of your background, and then we'll jump into what's happening today and in 2020.
Well, yeah, sure, for sure. Thanks, Shawn, and Dr. Ann. Good to see you again as well. Thanks for the invitation. I'm a sales consultant to emerging and mid-sized businesses, mostly in the Pittsburgh area. Now with COVID, everything's remote, right? And what I really do is I try to help them to take the guesswork out of predicting what their sales will be. Mm-hmm. And that really includes some kind of heavy doses around the principles of servant leadership and what I like to call conscientious capitalism, which basically is the same thing as conscious capitalism, but we can talk a little bit about those distinctions over the course of the conversation. What I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to help business leaders to recognize that just like everything else in their business that is very likely defined by some kind of a process, sales can be a process too. Now that means more than just getting some sales training. Most sales training that I've gone through in my career, I've gone through lots of different kinds, is around things like the tactics of how to get a conversation started, how to do good discovery, those kind of things that are core and essential to the job of selling. But what I'm trying to add to that proposition is really to account for a strategy that is going to be helpful in ensuring that salespeople who are the voice and the face of your organization are aligned with what your core values are as a company and as a leader. And sure that in a modern marketplace, especially in the B2B space, which is really where my expertise is, people are looking for problem solvers. They're looking for trusted advisors. And the way to earn that trust is to put others before you and to understand what the best solutions are for their problems that you can either provide or that maybe someone else can. And that's really the approach that I'm trying to bring to my clients is how you make money matters. That's my tagline, basically. Mm-hmm. And what that means is it's not just about the transaction. It really is about the relationship, especially, again, in a B2B space.
Yeah, I get that. I think that's right. I think it's relationship. And that's something you and I talk a lot about, is really building that culture and that connection with your client, right? We've talked a lot about who are you, what do you communicate with, who do you connect with? And I think this kind of layers on top of that.
Yeah, I think that I've always looked at sales as being partly educational, or really mostly educational, in that you are, as Greg says, trying to be a problem solver. But the first question you ask is, how can I help you? Well, tell me about what's going on, but how can I be of assistance? That's that servant leadership type of way in which you're dealing with your clients. But it's, in the end, you're educating to explain how the bridge is between what you have and how you can help what you have helps with what they need to get done in their long-term vision.
I take an approach as if I'm a doctor, really, and I talk about how the job of the salesperson is to diagnose problems and prescribe solutions. And that's hard to do if you're coming in with too many rigid preconceived notions. And if you're coming into that relationship only thinking about yourself. I've been in sales a long time. In fact, I'd like to tell the story. I actually started my career as an engineer, which is probably why I'm very oriented towards things like problem solving and trying to find solutions. But I tell people I turned to the dark side of sales and marketing many years ago because I discovered that the best way to create that relationship, and I tend to be a people person. I like people. I like being around people. So, COVID's been pretty tough. But if I'm going to be of some help to you, I can't just come in and tell you what you should do. I have to understand who you are. In fact, even to that point, the business problem to be solved is important, but if you're taking into account who the individual is. I talk a lot about things like buyer persona, right? If you're the kind of person who likes to be the first one to try new things, then, part of that characteristic has to be accounted for so that you don't make the person look bad trying something new that doesn't actually work or isn't the right fit. Conversely, if you're a much more guarded kind of a buyer, if you're part of the early majority or late majority marketplace, then my proposition to you as being the first one to do this, to gain some sort of competitive advantage, I'm not talking your language. I'm not talking to you as who you are as a person and as a business person. So the whole idea of diagnosing the problem and prescribing the solution, much like with a doctor, if you don't trust that doctor, you're probably not going to share with them the information that they need. And so how do you develop that trust? By starting the relationship really, truly, and sincerely about how can I be helpful? What can I do to help you to achieve your goal or overcome your obstacles in your business life? And how can I do that and account for you as a person? I think that's really what separates, at least it's been my experience, what separates truly long-term relationships, both personally and professionally, from just transactions.
Yeah, and 2020 is just a strange year, right? So because of it being 2020, I guess everything's topsy-turvy, right? So you and I were talking before we got on the show, Greg, about how so much has changed. And so I think some businesses are like, I don't want to change too much because, I don't know where the marketplace is going. And other people are in the boat of, we got to change now because everything's changed and we've got to react. So how do you balance?
I think one thing, if I can jump in here, I think too many salespeople find that they're not successful because of the fact that they have certain products that they are trying to sell, and they're trying to sell them whether or not they actually work for that particular business or not. They're saying, oh, this product is a solution for you when it really is not. And I think with COVID and 2020, we're now getting to a point where people are having to pivot, and the products and the sales products and services that have been used before, you have to really analyze now and say, are these still applicable, or do we need to make some revisions, not just in the conversation, but actually what the solutions are, because a lot of people are no longer doing business as they were. And we're finding that the square peg does not fit in the round hole. So we're really realizing that all parts of business have to be reevaluated. And that, I think, includes the sales and the sales process, and looking and saying, do these services and products still apply in 2020? Because we're never going back to where we were. We're having a new normal that's going to be developing. So do we need to really reassess exactly what it is we're about? And I think it's in B2B on all levels that has to be looked at.
Yeah, exactly. Greg, what do you think?
I completely agree. There's a lot of moving parts always in a disruption like the pandemic. This is this kind of situation in which it's not just enough to evaluate how you're selling. To your point, Ann, it is what's going on in terms of your target markets. I've always believed, and again, I coach my clients around this idea that a sales process ought to be really called the buyer process. Your approach to the marketplace isn't you forcing your will on a prospect. It's aligning yourself to how your markets do business. And so today in the pandemic, the way in which you are going to direct your salespeople to execute on the strategy has to account for the changes that have happened in your target markets. What are they doing that's different? Now, one way you can find that out, if you have a good solid customer base to begin with, is to simply talk to them about that. Again, it's really hard for some of us now to stay connected like we're accustomed to. But if you can take the time to talk to the people that you have those good relationships with as business partners, as customers, and understand what it is that they're doing differently, and even talk to them about how you can be helpful to them in this scenario, and to do it sincerely. I mean, I really am. I'm going to emphasize this point. If all you're doing is calling your customers to pretend you care about them and to extract information from them and to try and sell them something more as opposed to solving their problems, people are smart. They're going to see through that, right? And if you have good relationships with your customers, you're not doing that anyway. But individually, as team leaders, as executives, you want to make sure and be coaching your salespeople around this idea of serving the customer first, serving their needs first. Once you have some kind of information to go off of, once you have a good idea about what your current customers are doing, and expecting that many people who look like them, right, they're fit the profile, they're people like them who are buyers in future customer organizations. Now you can begin to understand what's going to be the best approach to take for that prospect who hasn't heard from you before or doesn't know anything about you. But you can start that conversation with that prospect now using reference stories. Hey, you look like somebody I've done business with before and helped out before, and here's how I've helped them before. And if these are the kind of struggles you're having now, I might be able to help you too. That kind of like opening, if you will, that kind of sincere desire to be helpful is a way to try and align yourself to the way your markets are having to pivot and change the way they do business today too.
So are you suggesting that, because I think that that's a good point you're making, that business owners should maybe take the time, if they have it, or find, get a virtual person or get some assistant in just to really go back and interview, just check in with all your clients, just do a survey kind of thing and say, hey, where are you? Is there any way we can help? What's going on? So that you get sort of some patterns showing moving forward, and then you can better redesign what kind of sales process you might need, or which products that maybe you weren't using as much before, but now you find, oh my goodness, this is really what they're in need of, so that you are better aligned with your customers.
Absolutely. And in fact, to the point of like, who does that? Who makes that inquiry? Again, it's about scale, right? So organizational leaders all the way to the top, it should have some kind of a relationship with some of their customers. I just believe that even Absolutely. In large organizations, it's not enough to just separate yourself from the customers who generate the revenue to keep your business going. I mean, somebody high up should be calling the really important strategic kinds of accounts. But you know what? The whole idea of having executives performing some of this, having marketing doing this, having sales doing this. Heck, you can even start to think about how somebody in accounting who's had a long-standing relationship with a customer because they've been a customer for a long time, and you're processing invoices or payments. There's maybe some kind of a relationship there. Now, I wouldn't enforce somebody who's not comfortable doing stuff like that to do it, but my feeling is, employ the resources and the people that you have in your organization to understand your market. It's a good idea anyway, right? I mean, it's the sort of thing you should know anyhow. But nowadays,
I think just if I can jump in here,
sure.
And I want to ask a question for Shawn. I think that what I'm suggesting is I'm thinking this through. So it's sort of, a half-baked idea maybe, but I'm thinking that if you could get a set of questions that you have people asking the same question, to all of your clients, customers, then you see apples to apples and really do get to see some trends. And Shawn, I'm thinking that with our journey to CEO, this is a real issue for an entrepreneur who is going and trying to follow the journey path and wants to be a CEO. To your point, Greg, too, when is it still important for that entrepreneur to have that relationship? Because if you get to be, you're putting on the CEO hat and you've been able to divide up all your work and been able to grow the business, you may lose that, and you may get yourself into the CEO role and lose those relationships that you've built over time. So it becomes sort of a question of what is the right relationship. And Shawn, I wonder how that works.
This is one of the hardest steps we see over and over again.
Yes,
sales, customer management. A lot of people say that, like, but my customers want to deal with me directly. They want to talk to me, and I know them, and I know their issues, and I just can't hand it off to anybody. And this is where a lot of businesses get stuck from growth, because they have a hard time going from the early days where the entrepreneur to be CEO is in there in everything and having that very personal touch, to being an enterprise where, we talk about the entrepreneur getting more of that long range planning, strategic vision, setting the culture, setting the tone of the organization. And, if you're spending your time doing that, then you're not making the personal calls, you're not going to your customer's location. So it's tricky. So, I think it'd be great to get Greg's ideas on how do you go through this kind of transition, particularly on the sales side, from being the point of contact to running a company and somebody else is the point of contact. That's a very tricky change.
So when do you hire the salesperson?
And how do you switch, right?
Yeah.
How do you switch the customer out? Because everybody's going to be disappointed that they no longer work directly with the owner.
I really love this. I really love this topic. Yes. Especially startups that I've worked with, this is absolutely one of the great hurdles that all of them tend to face, and each of them addresses in a sort of different way. My advice is always, look, you've got to be who you are first and foremost as an individual, and the relationships that you've created, especially as a startup and as an early stage company, are always going to be important to you. But I also think that your customers, no matter how strong that relationship is, no matter how personal it is, they will understand that as your business grows and evolves, that you're still going to be there. You're going to be the person who's at the helm, who's guiding the rest of the organization to continue to do the sorts of things you've always done. You just can't be as actively involved in the day-to-day if you're going to continue to grow this organization and be even more helpful and more useful to them and to other customers like them. And that can feel like a really hard kind of a conversation, especially if you're a real if you really have a strong relationship. If you're a real strong people person, you worry that my customer's going to feel like I'm abandoning them, or I don't have time for them anymore. They're going to be angry with me because I'm asking them to keep me apprised, but contact customer service when there's issues because they can help you faster. That's the reality, though. And I think if a business owner wants to evolve through the stages of their growth, they can't be the gating factor to that growth. And entrepreneurs, look, I love entrepreneurs and startups. People that have the courage to go out and do things like that are just some of the people that I admire the most. But at some point, you can't. If you want to be a boutique, that's okay. But if you have aspirations beyond that, and if you don't have that kind of conversation with those early customers, if you're worried about doing that, and you don't empower your people to execute for you, aligned with what your core values are, then you will only be a boutique. And again, it's not a judgment. it's a decision that the entrepreneur gets to make. But getting past that requires it requires a sense of authenticity, that you talk to your customers who say, I really love working with you. I only want to deal with you. If that's going to be an obstacle to your growth, you have to have that conversation with them. You don't have a choice. And what most people will understand that, I think.
I think it is, and I've had to have this awkward conversation, in the growth of my business. I had a customer who, really didn't want to. They were having a hard time growing to the next level, and we were growing to the next level. And ideally, you do it together, right? Your customer's getting bigger, and you're getting bigger, and you can all grow at the same time, and you understand each other. But yeah, some people don't want that growth, and as we were growing, we were losing that personal connection, and I couldn't do the same things I used to do. And we really had to have a conversation and we went separate ways, and it's just the way it worked. But you have to do that sometimes in business, right? Sometimes you have to walk away from people that don't fit. And maybe some people are fit at one point in your sales growth or your company growth, and later they're not a fit, right? You have to have the maturity to know that.
That is a really excellent point. One of my adages when I talk about what going to market is really all about is that I talk about the fact that everyone's a suspect, but not everyone's a prospect, right? And not every prospect's going to become a customer. And at some point, some customers may not fit the business any longer. And that's just kind of a natural part of how businesses evolve over time. It could be the customer that changes. It could be you that changes. It could be both organizations that change. And again, I really think that if a customer doesn't understand that your business is growing and being successful, and that means you can't just call the founder and CEO as your customer service rep, it's a hard thing to have to come to grips with. But maybe that's just not a good customer anymore either. It has nothing. It's not personal. It's just a matter of them wanting a relationship with you that you, again, honestly can't provide. If you can't serve that customer well, then it's really kind of on them to decide whether they still want to be a customer. But you already know you can't do the job they want you to do. It's kind of on you to tell them that too.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of businesses held back by this, right? Where
of course. Oh, yeah.
They feel that obligation to their early customers and holds them back. Ann, looks like you've got a great point here.
I got two guys that like to do a lot of talking here. I think that in this COVID time, for example, it is very important. And I'm doing this with my own business right now, where we're going and we're doing a survey. I'm bringing someone in that is, has not been in my business, but is a neutral party. And we're going through and we're going to be able to sort through which customers and which individuals I want, or I feel that I can still serve and serve well. And there's some that have changed their business model, and therefore it's not no longer a fit. But I want to make certain that there may be some clients that now need different things than they needed before, and now I need to step in a different role for them. And I think that it just becomes important, especially when you have such a disruption, that you go through and you take a hard look at that relationship between you and your whole list of clients, and make sure that you're who you say you are. They're who they know that they can use your services still, but it may be in different ways. Or you find, which we found, Shawn, when we've done some interviewing, that some of the business owners that we've talked with have literally taken on a whole new revenue stream. And so then they put in a new process because of COVID. So now they're able to maybe let go of one revenue stream, but now they have a revenue stream that they see as they're talking to their clients really need. And so they go down a different path. So, I mean, it's just so important. I can't emphasize this enough, to really assess where you're going and make sure that whatever sales program, whatever marketing program, whatever systems you're putting in place are going to be aligned with where the future is going in after this pandemic.
Yeah. Greg?
Yeah, again, great points. It's about adjusting to the changes that are happening in the markets that you serve, identifying where some new opportunities might exist. The fact that you're doing this with a third party is, I think, a really smart choice for no other reason than it removes some of those. It removes some of those dynamics that might not be as revealing. When we talk to people that we know, we tend to have a certain kind of conversation. And let's face it, most people are reluctant to kind of hurt your feelings, right? And so a customer that you've known for years and is going to maybe hold back and not tell you everything, right? Whereas with be careful using this term these days, with a pollster, with somebody who's actually doing this from a third party perspective, there's a chance for candor there that might be more difficult to get if you said to your salespeople, hey, I need you to call all of your customers, check in with them, see how they're doing, find out if there's another way for us to be helpful in a very genuine sort of way. And if you can engage them in a conversation around what's changing in their business, then that'll help us to understand how to serve them better and to open conversations with new markets or new customers. But that conversation is going to be influenced by the relationship that you have. The idea of doing this, again, third party wise, I think that's going to tell you things that you wouldn't maybe find out otherwise. I still think you could do both. And I think that has some value also, because now you can layer in that personal relationship aspect to it. But getting that data and finding out what are the changes that are occurring. And look, let's face it, we've also heard stories, I'm sure you have too, of organizations like microbreweries now making soap because nobody's coming to the microbrewery, but they know how to take that process and turn it into some other product. Mm-hmm. There's a company here in Pittsburgh that I'm going to hesitate to say the name because I don't want to get it wrong. They make bow ties out of recycled cloth materials of all kinds. Guess what they pivoted to? Making masks. Yeah. I mean, they're still making bow ties, but they're also making masks now. And I have some, and they're great. It's a good product. I wish I could remember their name. I'd give them a plug. I think it's Knotsland. Knotsland, I think is the name. Again, this to me is evidence that if we are encountering such incredible changes in our lives, in our markets, the way to discover the path to the future isn't to contract. It's not to just hunker down. It's actually to reach out, have more of those kinds of conversations. And I keep saying conversation because I'm a big fan of all forms digital. Look, everybody likes to communicate in different sorts of ways, but at some point, there's no replacing what the three of us are doing right now, and that's talking to each other, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really where, if you're going to give your salespeople some kind of direction, and I'm going to come back to that in a second as well, then don't just leave it to them to figure out what's happening with their customers. As I said earlier, engage the organization as a leader. Be part of that discussion also. And then you can give your salespeople some direction.
I think it can be very hard, Greg, with a lot of our business owners that we talk with, and Shawn and I have these conversations regularly. Too many of these business owners are so busy serving the particular clients that are right, on their desk right now. They're working through the products that they're selling them or their services. So they're engaged with them right now. They almost get their eyes and their nose into the weeds, and they can't look up to say, what's the big picture? And I think that's where, if they don't do that, then all that information you're telling them, Greg, about, hey, you've got to be able to look at, down the road, how can we serve? They have to find a way to do that. And it's so hard because they're busy. They're really, really busy. But are they really productive? And Shawn goes, we have that conversation about productivity versus busy. And that is an issue for our entrepreneurs because they get stuck on that.
I want to give Shawn and his co-author Shannon Gregg a plug now.
Yes.
There's a book out there called "It's About Time,"
right?
That all those folks should be reading and taking to heart. And look, nobody gets any extra time in the day, and I get it. I've been on this path also. You wear many hats and sometimes all the hats. And if you're careful about your time management, if you actually build time in to the calendar to do certain things, you at least give yourself a chance at getting that task accomplished and really prioritizing what's happening. Look, I'm never going to really give advice to say ignore your customer if they have an issue, but you also have to, you can't just work in the business, you got to work on the business, right? That's a very common adage that entrepreneurs learn very quickly, is that if you're doing if you feel like nothing can get done if it doesn't come across your desk, you will be the gating factor to the growth of your organization. That's plain and simple. If no one is empowered to do things, then you'll never get any bigger than what you can squeeze into a 24-hour day.
And I know, and I tell people this all the time, that the number one customer, your number one customer, is you. And that's exactly the problem that so many have, Greg, is that they don't build in time for their own business. They need to build that in just like they do with any other customer. And blocks of time that they know, okay, we're going to work on marketing here, we're going to work on sales here. Each system, sales, marketing, financial, monitoring, product development, even the HR issues should all be systems, because it is the systems that build the revenue. It is not, you having to go through and just work at your desk or go run to see this client or that client. You've got to build in systems. So
I want to throw one more piece in there before Greg comments, which is, part of this too is, and some companies are more forward about this than others, but your employees are a sort of customer too, right? So you've got yourself, servicing yourself, servicing the long-term protection of your company with the systems you just talked about, Dr. Ann, but then you also have the employees who are important too, right? You got to keep them around. And I've seen companies that have kept customers that are abusive or put a lot of wear and tear on their employees, and that can have a cost too, right? So you've got to balance. I mean, the customer's always right is the old saying, but not every customer has to be your customer either. So
right. You can fire a customer.
You can fire them.
Yeah. So again, especially for the entrepreneur, the small business person, the decisions about how you use your time are, of course, yours. But the key determinant there, at least as far as experience has taught me, is what's the outcome that you want from that time that you invest. Everything you talked about in terms of setting time aside to address the elements of the business, including your people, is important. That's part of what the leadership's job really is. And the bigger that organization gets, the less you're going to be able to be involved in the transactions if you want to grow that business beyond where it is. And to your point, and systems and process are how you make it scalable. This is when it comes to the sales piece of it. Now, this is, again, my coaching to my clients is around not forcing salespeople to do everything the same, but to know what that buyer's journey is in making a decision about your product or service, and using the phases or the steps in that buying process to be the way that you predict and scale sales in your organization. And so that really helps salespeople to do a couple of things. One is to make good use of their time, because when it comes to the time that they have to spend, the more time they spend talking to a prospect is the more likely they're going to be able to turn that prospect into a customer. And if your processes and systems aren't well defined, they'll probably spend a lot of time, much more time than they should, just trying to wrangle resources and people together, and trying to have a sales meeting with their manager about, what's developing in their funnel, and they don't really have a way of gauging whether an opportunity is at 25% or 50% or 75%, it's kind of finger in the wind sort of a thing. If you have a good sales process that's mapped to the way your market buys, and people align the way that they behave and the time that they use to that process, then when you sit down to have a conversation with the sales team, excuse me, and it now comes to forecasting, right, which is important. Obviously, you got to know what's coming for lots of reasons. If you've identified the sales process to mean a deal at 25% is because it's checked off these 3 boxes, and it can't be 50% if it doesn't have the next 3 boxes checked off in terms of the buying behaviors, the activities, the information that you need to understand. Well, then now you're just not, again, if you're not doing that, you have a finger in the wind. And
now I have a question for this. With your processes, how important is it to include a CRM program? And if you have a CRM program up and running, I don't, whether it's the Salesforce or the Zoho or whatever you're using, who chooses that? Is that the CEO that chooses that? I mean, that becomes, to me, an extremely important aspect in building your sales process. So talk about that for a minute.
I love that question. So again, I'm going to give another shout out to my good and dear friend, Shannon Gregg, for sharing an article just yesterday that I've also shared out to social media about how to think about choosing a CRM. And I'll tell you, the one gigantic takeaway for me from that was that if you're going to use that CRM the right way, and the way I've talked about it, and they even reference this in the article, a single version of the truth, then you need to engage all of the potential users in that discussion. Maybe not necessarily in the decision, but certainly in the evaluation. Here's what I mean. It can't just be the CEO who says, I love XYZ system. I'm going to refrain from giving any of the CRM vendors a plug right now. If I am, well, look, I've used lots of different CRMs, so I have a sense as to what not all of them, because there's like 600 vendors, several of them look like and how they operate. If it was me just saying to my marketing department, my sales department, accounting, customer service, all parts of the business, this is the platform I want you to use because I like it. Honestly, I think I'm making a terrible decision because I'm one user. And you know what? I can probably get the information that I'm going to need to make good data-informed decisions from any of these platforms. More importantly, is what will my users adopt it? And Shannon has a PhD in this. She knows what she's talking about. This is the kind of shared leadership and really servant leadership thinking that I would advise the business owner or CEO to take into account before trying to just dictate what a system should be. Should you have a system? Absolutely, I think you should. Even for a small organization, I've never ceased to be amazed as to how business owners try to run their business on Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets. Yeah, they have a purpose for sure, but at some point, CRMs out there don't have big price tags associated to them. And I know you can't spend what you don't have, but you don't have to do a really in-depth ROI calculation to figure out your team spends 4 hours a week on a spreadsheet where they could be spending 10 minutes in a CRM.
Yeah, I think the CRM is important. I've been amazed that owners will try and forecast without having some of these, products on hand. And I mean, I've looked at a $12 million business that didn't have a budget. It's like, how do you do this? So, at some point, these business, again, if they're building themselves organically over time, and maybe they're in the second generation, we talk about that, Shawn and I do, but how it goes from one generation to the next, you've got to be able to put some of these products in place, because let's say you want to sell your business. It has to be something that can work without you. And you have to have these kind of assets in place, because your wealth from selling is going to come from having all of these systems in place and working, and the buyer is going to have to be able to look at your client list and know what you really have that's of value. So, you know, I get amazed that people don't have that kind of technology in place, don't have those platforms. Every single one of the systems, whether it's marketing, sales, as I said, financial development, product development, there should be systems in place, but there should be platforms in place so that you can analyze and make more informed decisions. So it just surprises me that they're not in place in more of our businesses.
My experience has been that some of the business owners that I've talked to over the years maybe just don't have enough awareness or appreciation.
Right.
And I just had this conversation like 2 weeks ago, I think it was. Someone was, we were talking about CRMs, and Salesforce, of course, comes up all the time because they're the 800-pound gorilla in this marketplace, right? And they've been around a long time. It's a great platform and it does lots of stuff. And what they felt like was that there's no room for them to even consider Salesforce. And my recommendation was, oh yes, there is. Don't think that you are not a candidate for any particular platform because you're not, Delta Airlines or Coca-Cola or whatever, right?
But some platforms may have more bells and whistles.
As a business, be looking for the tools that your people need to do their job more effectively and efficiently.
But some platforms are going to have more bells and whistles than you need. Yeah,
sure, absolutely.
That's the kind of thing that I think advisors like you, Greg, can come in and say, no, this is one that really aligns itself to your clients better, because it's fine. It can give you all this information, but if it's information you're not going to use, then you're paying for stuff that is not necessary.
Paying for it. Plus, I hear a lot of people complain for complexity, right? So that's just an important decision to make early in the process, right? Is like, yes, usually you want more information, more abilities, but then what I find is a lot of times people will, a small company will implement a big system and then they'll sit around complaining that it's just too complicated and they can't use it and it doesn't work, and so you got to balance the two.
And speaking from direct experience, I can tell you I've never met anyone in sales who loves doing data entry work. And so part of what has to be considered in that decision about a CRM is what do I really need at this point in our evolution, and how much time should we invest in a system that does 8 things that we're not going to need for another 3 years. There's the runway for how long you keep a CRM. It's not a mortgage. You're not going to have this system for the next 10 years. Things do change, and that decision to put the right tool in the right place ought to be considering just where you are too, in terms of what level of complexity is right for you. There are lots of systems out there that have bare bones kind of functionality that I've used myself that do the job that the salesperson needs it to do and provides the kind of output in terms of reports that leadership needs to make decisions. Is it everything that you would want to know? No, but if it gets the job done at the right price point and produces the efficiencies that you're looking for, then go with it and reevaluate in another 2 years or something, as your needs change.
That's a really good point, that your CRM, you're not married to it for the rest of the business life. And then that's what I say about all technology. Every year you should be reevaluating, because so many of these are subscription based, and you have to look at it and say, am I going to use this subscription again this year, or do I need something else? And it's in everything from what we're using with video, what we're using with sales, what we're using in our marketing, websites, everything needs to be reevaluated. It's just to see how long do we need it, and then what's the rollover like? How easy is it to transition to something that's new and improved, as we continue to evolve.
Well, I want to zoom in on the change point too, Greg. And it's been a great conversation today. And I think maybe something that's probably sitting out there is, we're talking a lot about sales processes, implementing your sales processes, and being in 2020 with the year we've had. There's probably a lot of people changing their sales processes, and you alluded to the brewery, right? You were selling alcohol and now you're selling hand sanitizer and soap. So, so that's a radical transformation to your sales process. What do you recommend for people that have to do that, right? You went from being a dine-in restaurant to being a delivery shop. You radically changed your business. What do you recommend for people that had to radically change their sales process or might have to do that in the near future?
So I love that question. Especially in the B2B space, that's kind of where, again, my expertise is. So I won't try to talk to breweries about how to start marketing hand sanitizer. But if the organization's leadership, if you as the entrepreneur, the business owner, the C-suite see a need to start changing either the products or services or the markets that you're going to pursue, then you obviously have to do what you've always done, and that is ensure that your salespeople have the intelligence and the data that they need to be able to be effective at pursuing new opportunities. That includes now the means by which you're going to pursue those new opportunities. If your markets or the new target markets are different than what you've done before, you can't just assume that you can tell your salespeople what to do. You have to treat this like it's a new product launch. You have to treat this like it's opening a new marketplace. You need to do the kinds of things that you've always and incorporate the actual tactics now that are going to be, we'll call it COVID aligned. If all you ever did before and focused on was outbound phone calling, and now nobody's in the office, clearly that tactic is not going to work so well anymore, right? And vice versa. You have to figure out and give your salespeople direction. The thing I always think about between sales and marketing, by the way, is that it's two sides of the same coin, okay? You can't just leave it to your salespeople to figure out who they should talk to, what they should say, and why that marketplace should care. That's marketing's job. Sales is the execution part of that. Now, yes, they are in the field, so to speak. They are the intelligence that's coming back to the organization. So you need to listen to what your salespeople tell you. But they're the ones who ought to be taking the initial direction from you, the leadership team, and the marketing department around where the best opportunities exist, and here's how to pursue that, and then learn and grow as you do it.
Yeah, I think that interaction and that learning is so critical.
Oh, yeah.
Greg, you've given us a lot of great tips. I want to remind people you're watching a Journey to CEO show YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe, check out our Facebook page. But Greg, how do they get deeper into your work and get to know your stuff better?
So thanks for that question. The simplest place to start is at my website. It is theconscientiouscapitalist.com. Everything is linked from there. The blogs, the social media, email and contact forms, scheduling links. Start at theconscientiouscapitalist.com.
Wonderful. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah.
And another fantastic show, guys. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Drop us comments. We want to read them. We'll pass them along to Greg. Let us know what you're thinking, what issues you're having. We'll probably have Greg back again. But thanks for joining us, everybody, for another edition of Journey to CEO show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.